In the early months of 1942, the Pacific War Theater presented a grim tableau for the Allied powers. Following the devastating strike on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Imperial Japanese forces unleashed a relentless offensive, sweeping across Southeast Asia and the Pacific with an unprecedented operational tempo. The initial shock of Hawaii quickly gave way to a wave of strategic defeats that profoundly impacted Allied morale and strategic outlook. The Philippines, a key American possession, fell in May after a brutal, drawn-out campaign marked by the Bataan Death March, a stark testament to the brutality of the conflict. Before that, Singapore, the supposedly impregnable British naval base and linchpin of their defense in Asia, capitulated in February, marking one of the largest surrenders in British military history. Hong Kong, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, one after another, these vital territories and their rich resources were absorbed into Japan's rapidly expanding Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. This relentless expansion left the United States and its allies reeling. The perceived invincibility of Western military power had been shattered. On the home front, American morale plummeted. News of successive defeats, coupled with the initial inability to strike back effectively, fostered a deep sense of frustration, vulnerability, and a palpable thirst for retribution. The public clamored for action, for any sign that the tide could be turned, that the Japanese homeland itself was not beyond reach. Politically and militarily, the pressure on President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his Joint Chiefs of Staff was immense. The psychological weight of these early defeats was almost as damaging as the material losses. There was an urgent, desperate need for a symbolic victory, not necessarily one that would inflict catastrophic damage on the enemy, but one that would restore faith, demonstrate American resolve, and perhaps, most crucially, prove that Japan's perceived invulnerability was a dangerous illusion. The psychological terrain of the war had become as critical as the physical battlefield. While American strategists grappled with the devastating aftermath of Pearl Harbor and formulated daring counterstrokes, the Empire of Japan embarked on a breathtaking expansion, transforming the Pacific into a testament to its military might. In the wake of December 7, 1941, the psychological landscape for Tokyo was one of unbridled triumph and seemingly unstoppable momentum. Within a mere 6 months, Imperial Japanese forces swept through vast swaths of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, achieving objectives that had been considered impossibly ambitious. Malaya fell swiftly, culminating in the surrender of Singapore, Britain's supposedly impregnable fortress, on February 15, 1942. The strategically vital Philippine Islands, defended by a combined American and Filipino force, succumbed after fierce resistance, with the Bataan Peninsula and Corregidor falling in April and May, respectively. Simultaneously, the resource-rich Dutch East Indies, crucial for their oil and rubber, were systematically conquered, providing Japan with the vital raw materials necessary to sustain its war machine. Hong Kong, Wake Island, Guam, and numerous other outposts were seized with startling speed and efficiency. These rapid and decisive victories fostered an almost intoxicating sense of invincibility within Japan. The propaganda machine relentlessly reinforced the narrative of the emperor's divine protection and the unparalleled prowess of the imperial army and navy. For the average Japanese citizen and many within the military hierarchy, the homeland itself was considered an untouchable sanctuary, safeguarded by the vast expanse of the Pacific and the formidable strength of their armed forces. The idea of enemy aircraft penetrating Japanese airspace to strike at the heart of the empire seemed not merely improbable, but utterly inconceivable, a concept reserved for enemy fictions.
Yet, amidst this euphoria, one of Japan's most brilliant strategists, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet, harbored deep, prescient anxieties. Even after the stunning success at Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto had famously warned, "If I am told to fight regardless of the consequences, I shall run wild for the first 6 months or a year, but I have absolutely no confidence for the second or third year." He understood implicitly that Japan, with its limited industrial capacity and reliance on imported resources, could not sustain a prolonged conflict against the industrial might of the United States. His strategic vision was always predicated on a swift, decisive blows to force a negotiated peace rather than a war of attrition. The overwhelming early victories, while undeniably impressive, risked breeding a dangerous overconfidence, diverting focus from his urgent imperative to deliver a knockout punch to the American Pacific Fleet before its full power could be brought to bear. This growing chasm between public perception of invulnerability and Yamamoto's stark strategic reality would soon be violently exposed. After the shock of Pearl Harbor and the subsequent deluge of rapid Japanese victories across the Pacific, American morale plummeted. The U.S. High Command understood that a direct, psychological counterstrike against the Japanese homeland, though fraught with immense logistical and operational challenges, was an absolute imperative. It was a matter of demonstrating resolve, boosting domestic spirits, and, crucially, shattering Japan's perceived invulnerability. Within the strategic councils of both the U.S. Navy and the nascent Army Air Forces, various proposals for such a retaliatory blow were debated. Many quickly dismissed as unfeasible due to the vast distances involved and the formidable defensive perimeter Japan had established. A land-based bomber strike was conceptually straightforward, but practically impossible from existing Allied airfields. The solution, if one existed, would have to be revolutionary. The genesis of what would become the Doolittle Raid can be traced to a seemingly innocuous observation made by Captain Francis Lowe, a submariner on Admiral Ernest J. King's staff. In January 1942, while visiting the Norfolk Naval Air Station, Lowe witnessed Army B-25 Mitchell medium bombers conducting touch-and-go landings on a relatively short runway. He was struck by the surprisingly brief takeoff distance these twin-engined aircraft required. A daring, almost audacious concept immediately coalesced in Lowe's mind. Could these land-based bombers, designed for conventional runways, be launched from the deck of an aircraft carrier? This was a truly revolutionary proposition. Medium bombers were heavy, unwieldy for naval operations, and utterly unsuited for the traditional catapult launches or short-deck operations typical of carrier-borne aircraft. Naval doctrine was clear. Carriers launched specialized naval fighters and dive bombers, not land-based strategic assets. Lowe quickly brought his extraordinary notion to Admiral King, the Commander-in-Chief, U.S. Fleet, and Chief of Naval Operations. King, known for his stern demeanor and strategic foresight, recognized the potential psychological and strategic leverage such an attack could provide. He immediately presented the idea to General Henry H. Hap Arnold, the Chief of the Army Air Forces. Arnold, equally audacious in his thinking, embraced the concept with an enthusiasm that belied its inherent difficulties. The seemingly impossible had found its champions. An operation of such unprecedented audacity demanded a leader of equally singular vision and experience. The choice for this perilous endeavor fell upon Lieutenant Colonel James H. Doolittle, a figure whose formidable reputation in aviation was built on a foundation of daring, intellect, and relentless pursuit of excellence.
Doolittle was far from a conventional military officer. He was an aviation pioneer, an acclaimed air racer, and a brilliant aeronautical engineer. Before the war, he had already etched his name into the annals of flight, setting speed records, winning prestigious air races like the Schneider Trophy and the Bendix Trophy, and achieving the first blind flight solely on instruments in 1929. His PhD in aeronautical engineering from MIT underscored a mind that combined practical piloting skill with deep scientific understanding. He had served as a test pilot, a designer, and an innovator, always pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible in the air. This unique blend of audacious courage and meticulous scientific rigor made him the ideal candidate to conceptualize and execute a mission that defied conventional wisdom. General Arnold and Admiral King recognized that Doolittle possessed not only the technical acumen to grasp the immense challenges of launching medium bombers from a carrier deck, but also the inspirational leadership to motivate aircrews for a near-suicidal mission. His extensive experience with aircraft modifications, performance optimization, and high-risk maneuvers was invaluable. Moreover, Doolittle was known for his calm under pressure and his unwavering commitment to his men and the mission's objective. He was the epitome of the resourceful, intelligent, and daring aviator, qualities essential for navigating the countless unknowns inherent in striking the Japanese homeland. His selection was not merely based on rank or administrative necessity, it was a strategic choice, entrusting the fate of a critical psychological offensive to the man most uniquely qualified to forge success from improbability. The audacious concept of launching medium bombers from an aircraft carrier was, by all conventional military doctrine, an engineering impossibility. The B-25B Mitchell, a robust, twin-engined aircraft, was designed for land-based operations, possessing neither the structural reinforcement for carrier landings nor the inherent short takeoff capabilities required for a catapult launch, a system the American carriers of the era largely lacked for aircraft of this size. Yet, the strategic imperative demanded precisely this feat. To transform these land-based behemoths into carrier-capable strike aircraft, albeit for a one-way mission, required an unprecedented series of modifications, each a testament to wartime ingenuity and necessity. Every non-essential piece of equipment was meticulously stripped away to reduce the aircraft's takeoff weight. This included the removal of armor plating, particularly around the bombardier station and the rear gunner's compartment, along with some defensive armament. Crucially, for the extended range required for the deep penetration into Japanese airspace, auxiliary fuel tanks were installed wherever space allowed. The bomb bay, instead of its usual payload of ordnance, now housed a 160-gallon collapsible fuel tank, with additional tanks strategically fitted in the lower fuselage and even in the crawlway leading to the tail. This significantly augmented the B-25's operational range, transforming it into a true long-distance bomber. The highly sensitive and complex Norden bomb sight, designed for precision high-altitude bombing, was deemed unsuitable for the mission's low-altitude, high-speed attack profile. In its place, Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle himself devised a rudimentary yet effective Mark Twain sight, essentially two pieces of metal and a couple of crosshairs, a testament to practical improvisation over sophisticated technology. Furthermore, the heavy .50 caliber machine guns in the ventral or bottom turret were taken out entirely to save weight and reduce drag. In a bizarre but effective deception, a pair of broomsticks, painted black, were mounted in their place. This simple ruse was intended to mimic the appearance of operational machine guns, hopefully deterring Japanese fighter pilots from attacking from below. These radical modifications, often executed by civilian contractors working alongside military personnel, were conducted under the strictest secrecy at Eglin Field, Florida. The hand-picked crews underwent intense training, practicing short-field takeoffs from a simulated carrier deck painted on a runway. Under Doolittle's relentless guidance, they were pushed to their limits, mastering a maneuver considered impossible just months prior, all while maintaining absolute operational security regarding their ultimate target. The simulated carrier deck, a stark white outline painted on the Eglin Field runway, became the daily crucible for these elite airmen. It was here, amidst the sweltering Florida heat and under a veil of absolute secrecy, that the audacious tactical doctrines of the Doolittle Raid were forged. Their primary challenge was the short-field takeoff, a maneuver fundamentally alien to the B-25 Mitchell medium bomber, designed for conventional land-based operations. Pilots practiced launching their fully loaded aircraft within an astonishing 450 feet, a fraction of the standard takeoff distance, and barely the length of a carrier flight deck. This required not only exceptional piloting skill, but also a precise understanding of their aircraft's performance envelope at maximum gross weight. Engine performance was meticulously monitored, and every pilot developed an acute feel for the exact point of rotation, where the B-25, laden with fuel and ordnance, would reluctantly lift off the ground, often just clearing the simulated bow of the carrier. Beyond these precarious takeoffs, the crews honed their skills in extremely low-altitude navigation and bombing. Flying at treetop level, often at night, was a critical component for evading Japanese radar detection and achieving surprise. They practiced dropping inert bombs from altitudes as low as 1,500 feet, aiming for small, designated ground targets. The emphasis was on precision, ensuring that the limited bomb load, comprising 4 500-pound bombs per aircraft, would inflict maximum damage on industrial or military installations. Navigation over vast stretches of open ocean without the benefit of conventional radio beacons or ground references presented another formidable challenge.
Crews were drilled in celestial navigation, utilizing sextants and chronometers to plot courses by the stars, and in dead reckoning, relying on airspeed, heading, and elapsed time. The exigencies of the mission demanded absolute radio silence, transforming each aircraft into an isolated entity in the vast Pacific, relying solely on its crew's navigational acumen. The psychological toll on these volunteers was immense. Each man had volunteered for a dangerous, secret mission with unknown objectives, a stark contract that offered no details beyond the inherent risks. Day after day, they pushed their aircraft and themselves to the brink, knowing only that their training was for a single pivotal operation. The ultimate target remained a closely guarded secret, even from the pilots themselves, fostering a pervasive atmosphere of anticipation and tension. This deliberate ambiguity, while crucial for operational security, placed an extraordinary mental burden on crews who knew they were preparing for something unprecedented and potentially suicidal. In the clandestine atmosphere of Alameda Naval Air Station, California, an unprecedented operation commenced. 16 B-25B Mitchell medium bombers, distinguishable by their distinctive twin tails and twin engines, were meticulously hoisted aboard the flight deck of the newly commissioned aircraft carrier USS Hornet, CV-8. These aircraft had undergone extensive modifications, including the removal of their lower turrets and the installation of additional fuel tanks in their bomb bays to extend their operational range. Each bomber, despite its land-based design, represented a potent symbol of America's nascent resolve.
Once loaded, with the aircraft tightly packed aft of the carrier's island superstructure, the Hornet slipped quietly out of San Francisco Bay on April 2, 1942, her true mission shrouded in absolute secrecy. She steamed westward, maintaining radio silence, until she rendezvoused with Vice Admiral William F. Halsey's formidable Task Force 16 in the mid-Pacific. This powerful escort group comprised the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, CV-6, 4 cruisers, 8 destroyers, and 2 fleet oilers, forming a robust protective screen for the audacious endeavor ahead. The ensuing trans-Pacific voyage was a study in profound tension and strategic imperative. For over 2 weeks, the combined task force navigated the immense expanse of the ocean, a gray armada moving with deliberate purpose toward enemy-controlled waters. Strict radio silence was a non-negotiable directive, rigorously enforced across all vessels to prevent any Japanese intelligence asset from detecting their approach. Every man aboard understood the gravity of their mission, to deliver a psychological blow directly to the Japanese homeland, shattering the illusion of invulnerability fostered by months of unchecked victories. The risks were immense. The vast ocean offered few hiding places, and discovery by Japanese reconnaissance aircraft or submarines would invite immediate and devastating reprisal against the vulnerable task force. Their success hinged entirely on stealth and precision. The elaborate preparations for stealth, the meticulous navigation through vast open waters, all hinged on one critical factor: surprise. Yet, in the pre-dawn hours of April 18, 1942, that vital advantage was brutally stripped away. At approximately 0738 Tokyo time, while still some 650 miles east of the Japanese mainland, the USS Enterprise's radar detected an ominous contact. A small Japanese picket boat, the Nitomaru, positioned far beyond the anticipated patrol line. This was precisely the scenario the planners had dreaded. Immediately, the cruiser USS Nashville was dispatched. Its guns swiftly engaged and neutralized the Nitomaru, but the damage was already done. Before its demise, the picket vessel had transmitted a crucial message back to Japan. 3 enemy carriers sighted at 35 degrees north, 153 degrees east. The element of tactical surprise, the very cornerstone of the Doolittle Raid, had vanished, exposing Admiral Halsey's vulnerable task force. Aboard the USS Hornet, Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle was confronted with an agonizing decision. The task force was still approximately 170 miles beyond the pre-planned launch point and 10 hours ahead of schedule. Launching now meant a significant increase in flight duration, severely depleting the B-25's already constrained fuel reserves and making a safe landing in China far more precarious. Yet, lingering would expose the entire carrier task force to imminent Japanese air and naval retaliation, now that their position was compromised. Doolittle, understanding the paramount psychological imperative of the mission and the grave danger to the fleet, made the audacious and difficult choice. "Launch planes," he ordered, to Tokyo. This premature launch transformed an already perilous mission into an act of near desperation. Each B-25, meticulously prepared with bombs and auxiliary fuel tanks, would now have to fly an additional 170 miles, a distance that for many would prove insurmountable. The point of no return had been thrust upon them, not by design, but by unforgiven circumstance. From this moment, there was no safe passage back to the carriers. Every bomber crew was committed to a one-way journey into the heart of the Japanese Empire, fueled by courage and the slender hope of reaching distant Chinese airfields. With their engines roaring defiance against the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Pacific, the 16 B-25B Mitchell bombers, now critically short on fuel from their premature launch, continued their perilous journey towards the Japanese home islands. Each two-man crew navigated independently, maintaining radio silence, their mission reliant on individual skill and unwavering resolve. Flying at altitudes often no higher than the wavetops, they successfully evaded the outer rings of Japanese patrols.
The element of surprise, though partially compromised by the early encounter with the Japanese picket boat, remained largely intact for the Imperial homeland's air defenses. Japanese radar installations and observation posts, primarily configured to detect naval formations or carrier-borne aircraft approaching from the south and east, proved inadequate against the low-flying, unescorted medium bombers. Japanese operational doctrine simply did not account for land-based aircraft striking their sacred soil from such a direction. As the first B-25s began to appear over the Honshu coastline around midday, Sunday, April 18, 1942, they were met with a bewildered calm. Many citizens initially mistook them for friendly aircraft, some even waving, before the distinctive American markings and the roar of their engines signaled the unthinkable. The lead aircraft, piloted by Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle himself, targeted industrial facilities and military installations within Tokyo. Other crews followed suit, unleashing their payloads of incendiary and high-explosive bombs over designated targets in Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe. At altitudes often as low as 900 feet, bombardiers aimed for key industrial complexes, oil storage tanks, and military infrastructure. Flak, initially sporadic and uncoordinated, soon intensified as Japanese ground defenses scrambled to react. Though some Japanese fighters, primarily Zeros, were vectored to intercept, their pilots were largely caught off guard and struggled to engage the fast-moving, low-altitude bombers before they completed their runs and began their westward escape. The material damage inflicted by the Doolittle Raid was, by strategic standards, modest. While some factories and facilities sustained hits, the overall impact on Japan's war production capacity was negligible. Yet, the psychological repercussions for the Imperial Japanese High Command and the civilian populace were profound and immediate. The raid shattered the deeply ingrained belief in the inviolability of the home islands, a core tenet of national morale and military confidence. It proved that the American enemy, far from being decisively defeated, possessed the audacity and ingenuity to strike at the very heart of the empire. This audacious act of psychological warfare sowed widespread huangmong, dismay and confusion among Japanese leadership, forcing a critical reevaluation of their defensive strategies and ultimately contributing to the strategic imperative for the Battle of Midway. As the last B-25 Mitchell vanished over the horizon, the roar of its engines slowly fading, a new sound began to permeate the air over Honshu. The collective dieng thit, the scream of a nation in shock. The Doolittle Raid, though limited in its material destruction, ripped through the veneer of invincibility that had shielded the Japanese home islands, laying bare a profound and unsettling vulnerability. In the streets of Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, and Kobe, initial confusion quickly devolved into raw panic. Citizens, accustomed to the comforting assurances of their leadership that the empire's sacred soil was inviolable, now witnessed American bombers, unchallenged, delivering ordnance upon their cities. The sight of smoke rising from their capital, the very heart of the empire, was a psychological blow of immense magnitude. Families scrambled from shelters, disoriented and terrified, confronted with the stark reality that the war had, against all predictions, arrived at their doorstep. Among the military leadership, the reaction was a potent cocktail of disbelief, fury, and disarray. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's prescient warnings about the limited duration of Japan's window of opportunity suddenly resonated with terrifying clarity. The emperor himself, Hirohito, was reportedly deeply disturbed, directly questioning his naval command about the catastrophic failure of their defensive perimeter. The inability of the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army Air Forces to intercept a single bomber force, let alone prevent the raid entirely, highlighted critical deficiencies in operational intelligence, early warning systems, and homeland air defense coordination. The concept of unassailable Nippon was utterly shattered.
In the immediate aftermath, a desperate effort was launched to control the narrative. Japanese propaganda, ever keen to portray the empire as strong and victorious, swiftly moved to downplay the raid's significance. Official announcements minimized damage, attributing it to minor, isolated incidents, and even claiming heroic interceptions of the enemy aircraft. The public was told that the raid was a mere annoyance, a futile act of desperation by a collapsing foe. Yet, the reality on the ground, witnessed by countless citizens, painted a different picture. The scattered debris, the small but undeniable fires, and the very presence of American aircraft over their cities could not be entirely obfuscated. The chasm between official pronouncements and tangible evidence fostered a growing sense of unease and mistrust. This profound realization of vulnerability, born from the "scream from Tokyo," catalyzed an immediate and drastic reevaluation of Japan's strategic posture. The High Command, particularly Admiral Yamamoto and the Imperial General Headquarters, became fixated on extending their defensive perimeter eastward, believing that the American carriers responsible for launching the raid must be located and decisively eliminated. This intense psychological pressure, directly triggered by the Doolittle Raid, would become a primary strategic imperative, irrevocably accelerating plans for a decisive engagement at a tiny, obscure atoll in the Central Pacific, Midway. With their mission accomplished over the Japanese homeland, the 16 B-25 crews now faced the most perilous leg of their journey, reaching safety. Due to the early launch, all aircraft were critically low on fuel. Instead of landing at pre-arranged airfields in unoccupied China, most of the planes were forced to crash land or the crews bailed out over a vast, unfamiliar expanse of eastern China, much of it under Japanese occupation. Dispersed across hundreds of miles, the airmen found themselves amidst a population caught between the brutal Japanese occupation and their own determined resistance. In an extraordinary display of courage and solidarity, countless Chinese civilians, often at immense personal risk, came to the aid of the downed American aviators. Local villagers, farmers, and Chinese resistance fighters, including units of Chiang Kai-shek's Nationalist Army, provided food, shelter, and guided the bewildered Americans through enemy lines. This clandestine network of assistance was instrumental in rescuing 69 of the 80 Doolittle Raiders. However, not all were so fortunate. 8 of the airmen were captured by Japanese forces. 3, Lieutenants Dean Hallmark, William Farrow, and Corporal Harold Spots, were tragically executed by firing squad after a sham trial for war crimes, a clear violation of the Geneva Conventions. A 4th, Lieutenant Robert Mather, succumbed to disease and malnutrition in captivity. The remaining 4 endured brutal imprisonment as prisoners of war until their liberation at the end of the conflict. The Japanese Imperial General Headquarters, humiliated by the Doolittle Raid and enraged by the assistance provided to the American airmen, unleashed a horrific punitive campaign against the Chinese civilian population in the provinces of Zhejiang and Jiangxi, or in Japanese, the Chekiang-Kiangsi operation. Their objectives were twofold: to destroy airfields that could potentially be used for future American raids, and to exact collective punishment on the Chinese populace for their perceived collaboration. Over a 3-month period, from May to August 1942, Japanese forces systematically swept through the region, engaging in a scorched earth policy.
Villages were razed, crops destroyed, and an estimated 250,000 Chinese civilians were massacred in a brutal campaign of retribution.
Eyewitness accounts and subsequent investigations revealed widespread atrocities, including mass executions, torture, and the deliberate use of biological warfare agents, such as cholera and typhoid, spread through contaminated wells and food supplies. This horrific retaliation underscores the immense, often unseen, human cost of strategic operations and the brutal realities of total war, demonstrating Japan's willingness to inflict extreme suffering upon civilian populations as a deterrent. The Doolittle Raid, though inflicting minimal material damage on Japan, unleashed a tidal wave of psychological impact, primarily on the American home front and among Allied forces. Following months of unbroken Japanese victories, culminating in the fall of Singapore and the Philippines, American morale had plummeted. Pearl Harbor had been a wound that festered, leaving a nation feeling vulnerable and beaten. The news of American bombers striking the Japanese capital, broadcast across radio waves and emblazoned on newspaper front pages, ignited a powerful surge of national pride and defiance. It proved that the United States could and would strike back. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, master of wartime communication, skillfully capitalized on this morale boost. When pressed by reporters to reveal the origin of the B-25s, he famously quipped that the bombers had launched from Shangri-La, a mythical paradise, a playful and deliberately evasive answer that both delighted the American public and infuriated Japanese intelligence, leaving them to speculate wildly about the raid's true staging point. For Japan, however, the Doolittle Raid was a profound psychological shock, far exceeding its tactical significance. The very idea that American aircraft could penetrate Japanese airspace and bomb Tokyo was considered an impossibility, a direct challenge to the perceived invulnerability of the home islands. This audacious attack fundamentally altered Japan's strategic calculus. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, had long argued that Japan's initial string of victories offered only a limited window to force a decisive engagement with the U.S. Pacific Fleet before America's immense industrial capacity could be fully brought to bear. The Doolittle Raid provided irrefutable evidence for his long-held conviction: Japan's defensive perimeter was dangerously porous. Yamamoto became an even more fervent advocate for expanding that perimeter further into the Central Pacific. He argued with renewed urgency that the only way to safeguard the homeland from future attacks was to eliminate the remaining American aircraft carriers and seize a strategically vital forward base that would extend Japan's defensive screen. This strategic imperative, intensified by the Doolittle Raid, directly contributed to the Japanese Imperial Navy's disastrous decision to launch Operation MI, the planned attack on Midway Atoll. Yamamoto envisioned Midway as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, a crucial stepping stone that would both serve as an advanced defensive outpost and, critically, lure the U.S. Pacific Fleet into a decisive battle of annihilation. Thus, the Doolittle Raid, initially conceived as a morale-boosting retaliatory strike, inadvertently set in motion a chain of events that would lead to one of the most pivotal turning points of the Pacific War. Although it inflicted only negligible material damage, the Doolittle Raid delivered a profound psychological blow to Japan's general staff and the public. It shattered the carefully cultivated illusion of the Japanese homeland's invulnerability, an illusion nurtured since the Meiji era. For the first time, the empire's capital had been struck by an enemy, compelling Tokyo to divert critical fighter aircraft assets from the front lines to defend the home islands. This bold act of American ingenuity and bravery generated a vital morale boost for the Allies, proving that the United States could and would strike back. More crucially, the raid directly catalyzed Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's resolve to launch the Midway campaign. Convinced that the U.S. carrier fleet posed an intolerable threat after demonstrating its reach, Yamamoto viewed Midway as the decisive opportunity to lure and annihilate these assets, thereby expanding Japan's defensive perimeter and neutralizing the specter of future raids. Through their audacious mission against overwhelming odds, the Doolittle Raiders forged an enduring legacy as exemplars of American courage and determination. Their actions not only altered the strategic landscape of the Pacific War, but also stand as a timeless testament to the spirit of a nation determined to retaliate. inspiring generations with their daring assault on an apparently invincible foe.